I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda. This is a book of prayer poems. And this one is entitled, Demand for Union with the Almighty. O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. Strengthen me through the sun. Calm my feelings through the moon. Caress me through the breeze. Love me through my love. Throb in me through my heart. Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. Speak through my voice. Help others through my hands. Use my mind to inspire them. Breathe through my breath. For within this fragile viol, thou alone canst sing thy complete eternal song. And this is a reading from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, which are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This week's reading is entitled, How Democratic is Truth? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. We live in an age when people assume that knowledge should be available equally to all. In matters susceptible of judgment by normal common sense, however, everyone knows there are exceptions. Access to a control room for intercontinental missiles is limited by universal consent to a very few. Access to the controls of a passenger airliner is limited to those with the necessary knowledge for operating them, and also to those with the proper authorization. If people don't see the disadvantages of making more subtle knowledge universally available, it is only because they are ignorant of the risks involved. In the case of subtle knowledge, the main disadvantage in making it universally available is the harm it might do to one who isn't ready for it, and who might even mock it. True, by mocking truth, he might undermine the faith of a few truth seekers. But then such tests can also be beneficial as a means of strengthening faith. Again true, the clever doubter's misrepresentation of those truths may dissuade a few seekers from following the spiritual path. But if a seeker really is sincere, he will recognize the truth eventually because it resonates with his own being. No, the greatest problem accrues to the shallow doubter himself. To give him an opportunity to affirm his ignorance might only estrange him even more from the truth, delaying the time when he will turn, as all people must eventually, to the light. Thus the scriptures advise not secrecy, but discretion in the sharing of truth. Jesus Christ says in the Gospel of St. Matthew, Give not that which is holy unto dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you. And Sri Krishna says in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Never speak of these truths to one who is without self-control or devotion, who renders no service, and who does not care to hear, or who speaks ill of me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Well, it's really a joy to be back with you all, and we missed you. It's strange because we weren't anywhere differently physically than usual, and in a way that was nice because there wasn't travel, there wasn't a time difference, there also wasn't a sense of kind of vibrationally being absent. And at the same time, it was nice to just be able to do some of the things we had to do, and also to just take a bit of a break to rest the mind and other things. But we missed you all. We're so glad to be back together, as I said, and also we were praying for you before, during, and after. And so, and we felt your prayers and support as well. This topic is really one that applies on many different levels. When we first come onto the spiritual path, and that can mean when we have our first glimmerings, when we first read Autobiography of a Yogi. It was wonderful for me the other day. Some vegetables were being delivered, and the driver of the truck, who is, usually I'm dealing with the actual delivery man, not sort of the hired truck that does it. But the driver of the truck also came out, because we do all of this, unloading of the vegetables outdoors. And he said, so you take meditation classes here, meaning you offer meditation classes here? And I said yes. And then he said, I have not finished reading the book. It's a very good book. And so I said, Autobiography of a Yogi? He said yes. And it just thrills the heart that you can talk about Autobiography of a Yogi while getting the food delivered. Really, it's one of the reasons why we love India, why we love Chennai, and why it's home. At the beginning of the spiritual path, when we've read the book, or we are starting out meditating and all of these things, there can come to us frequent challenges, just as were described in the reading, that some very kind person takes a kind interest in our lives and in what we're doing and in our business, and very kindly offers opinions about it. And it may not have been your experience, but it is very common that someone in some, whether it's a colleague or a friend or a relative, will challenge our spiritual aspiration. I know for me this was quite a shock. At first, I had never been involved in anything spiritual or religious before. I had had no interest in it, even an aversion based on what I had been exposed to, earlier in my life. I won't even say it was the fault of those other religions or paths, but the impression I got from them was not favorable and certainly not attractive. And so I just wasn't interested in the whole thing. So it surprised me when friends of mine, with whom I had been casting about for answers to life's problems, looking for the deep meaning and purpose of life, looking at this philosophy or that philosophy. This was all in college, and so it's sort of the natural predilection of people in their late teens and early 20s to be trying to solve the riddle of the universe, and also trying on different ways of thinking, different ways of being. But it was all, so I thought, certainly for me it was, in order to find answers, in order to seek the truth, with the assumption that there was a deeper and deeper truth, and that truth was the only thing that mattered. And so everyone was very happy to talk about all of these things, but when I found Autobiography of a Yogi, this was the answer. It had everything in it. It agreed with everything that I thought. And to put it another way, I had sort of come up with maybe 30% of the book's philosophy on my own. I had arrived at those same conclusions, and so again, it resonated with me, as Swamiji describes in the reading. But there was so much more beyond that, so many answers to questions that I had, so many answers to questions I didn't even have. I didn't have the sense to ask even those questions, and already the answers were given. And above all, it had not only just the theory, you could say. It didn't present only the truth. Theory is not a strong enough word. It is the truth. It is not theory, but law. But it also provided technique, or at least pointed in the direction of technique, that we could meditate to realize the truth, it said. And we could practice the technique of Kriya Yoga, and in 30 seconds of Kriya practice, grow spiritually the same which we would after 1 year of right spiritual living. Now that got me interested. So when I presented this to my friends, hey, listen, all these mental explorations we've been going on, here's the answer, to find them all saying, no thanks, Ada Vendam. What? But aren't we trying to find truth? Aren't we trying to, listen, don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. Just read the book. I don't want to read the book. Just read the first cover. First page. I don't even want to see the cover. It's not reasonable. Books by Nietzsche and so many other philosophers, oh sure, let's read them because they have famous names. And quoting them, we can sound impressive. But when it came to this book, which is, of course, equally impressive, and way beyond, actually, if you're judging it by the standard of truth, no interest. Just a prejudice even, an immediate rejection. So that surprised me. I realize in retrospect it shouldn't have. When people came to me, this is not how I felt I was approaching people, but I probably was, saying, listen, this is the answer, and it has to do with God. Well, when people approached me in that same way, I had taken a step back and I had said, Ada Vendam. Because, again, as I said, the things that had come at me that way were unappealing. But furthermore, I found that some people not only were not interested, but some people were actively opposed to my interest. And this was somewhat new to me, not completely, because I had encountered opposition in my life already just to my own choices of, on a worldly level, career choices and so on, from well-meaning relatives, because it didn't agree with their, they didn't agree. Let's just leave it at that. And so, but this was, people would make a point of trying to tear down my beliefs. And as again, it says in the reading that this was a challenge that people on the path sometimes face, that the doubter tries to attack their faith. And I had this repeatedly. I was reading Autobiography of a Yogi, and a cousin of mine, said, so what's happening in the book now? And I just read the passage I happened to be on, which included an event and then an explanation. And he laughed and proceeded to tear apart that whole thing with logic, saying doesn't have to do anything with the way it's written in the book. It's actually this, and everyone knows, and Darwin, and, on and on and on and on. And, I had to admit, it shook me because I didn't have an answer back. This is one of the problems that the new devotee faces. And new means newly reawakened in this lifetime after many, 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 many lifetimes in the past on the path. Because if this really were the first time on the path, your first time on the path, at the first sign of trouble, you would leave the path. You see, we touch it and then we go back and then to the world, and then we touch it again a little longer and then we go back. As I've joked sometimes, the first steps on the path is someone seeing an advertisement saying, oh, there's a spiritual talk or Kriya Yoga. No, thanks. Then to even see it represents some kind of magnetism to draw it into your life. I remember a woman came to one of our public talks, and she was holding the flyer, I think it was with Jyotishji and Deviji on it, and she just had really wide eyes, and she said, "I was given this morning." And we had put them in newspapers. I say very sort of generously to myself, we, but I was not the one at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. with the people stuffing the newspapers. So thank you to those of you who were. You know who you are. And she said, "This morning, my 2-year-old just came walking into the kitchen and handed this to me." And she said, "I have no idea how he got it." And I thought, well, did you get the newspaper? But she said, "I just don't know where it came from. And he handed it to me. And I just felt that I had to come." And it was wonderful. It was a really inspiring story. And who knows what wisdom her child had. Maybe he just liked the color. Or maybe there was something deeper going on there. But she didn't come back. And that to me also represents not just, I'm not trying to single her out at all, because what have we all done, and what do we all still do when we have an inspiration and may not act on it to the fullest? This is not a time for self-criticism. It's just a time to say, look, we all have room to improve and to go deeper. But I saw that there was that glimmer, there was that blessing. I mean, she herself said so. And then it was, I guess, time to digest and chew on that for a while before taking it further. So that's why I say, if you've been on this path, it is not the first time. It is not because you wouldn't still be here. So when those doubts come at us, those criticisms, those challenges, oh, and how do you know that's true? It can be difficult because our knowledge of the truth of God, our feeling of that truth is just that. It's a feeling. We don't necessarily have words. We haven't necessarily thought it through. We haven't matched all of our other sort of knowledge and understanding to that feeling. It's wonderful that the Autobiography of a Yogi does give us so much explanation in words that we can, and that's one simple answer we can give. If somebody is challenging us with a view to actually understanding, just give them the book. And that worked, for example, with my mother. She was quite concerned about this spiritual path and what was I getting involved in. And so I said, read the book. And so she read the book and said, it's fine. She said, I couldn't find one thing in that book that I could object to. It didn't attract her to follow the path, but she felt it was in line with the same truths she was learning in her own spiritual path. And I respected that because, as Master said to Swamiji, I don't remember how the conversation began, but basically it was surrounding difficult conversations with intellectuals. And Master said, true intellectuals you never have a problem with, because they are only interested in truth. And if a true intellectual sees that using his or her mind, that this is actually their understanding before now was flawed, and this is the truth that they hadn't seen before, they will immediately drop their wrong their wrong sort of premise and go for the truth. And so again, a true intellectual, I thought that was very helpful because there were many so-called true intellectuals coming at me with these attacks. And as I said, I didn't have the words to answer them. I hadn't had a chance to. And it's much easier to tear something down than to build something up. I think it was Abdul Kalam who said it's much easier to defeat a person than it is to win a person. It's a very, very beautiful and true statement. So, in any case, we have to accept, if we're new on the path, which can also mean the first 25 years of being on the spiritual path, in terms of integrating it into our life, deepening our experience of it, that these challenges are good for us. And that we should remember also, if we find ourselves frustrated, that to point the finger of blame at ourselves, and I shouldn't use the word blame, but the responsibility, meaning this karma, this test has come to us. It may be coming through this person or that person, and it can be tempting to say, if only that person wasn't in my life or not behaving in that way. But this challenge is something we have attracted, not necessarily as punishment, not because we had spent so many lifetimes ruining other people's lives by doubting, and so now we have to receive that karma ourselves. Yes, that can be literally true, but it doesn't mean that it's coming to us to make us behave better, to make us want the truth, because we already do want the truth. It's helping us perhaps, or testing us, or helping us to grow in other ways. So, for example, to be able to be calm, even if we don't have the answers. That happened to me. Somebody actually made a point, again, a relative of mine, of trying to tear down my faith, to the point that, it was basically over a weekend stay. I was staying at his house, and he and someone else were basically, it was almost like being on trial. And at one point, I got to take breaks every now and then in between the different hearings, and I decided, I told myself at a certain point, I was strategizing, because I was thinking, okay, now I see this line of argument, and so if he goes there, then I'll be able to answer with that, and then if he goes there, I could answer with that, but I was trying also not to be too personal, basically refraining from saying, oh, and what about you? Is your life such a shining example of happiness and balance that I should honor what you have to say as if you know anything? I would think if you did, your life might look differently. And though true, it's not very polite. It's not very kind. And my heart also, I thought, he may never forgive me if I say something like that. He may never forget it if I say something like that. It's not fair, because he's definitely hitting me over the head with 2 sledgehammers, and I'm proposing just to lift a little tiny pinky in opposition, just a pinky, kuti finger, and then, but you know what? It doesn't make it right. And you may find in your life that just a little bit of objection, and the other person, dissolves into tears or freaks out, or you get in trouble, and it doesn't seem fair. But that's because Divine Mother is saying to us, you are the big kid. You ought to know better. And this is your sort of arena of learning. And so this is, that's why you have the penalty, because this is where, can we behave properly? Can we do the right thing even when things are not fair? Not even remotely fair. Well, that's it. You can see the other side of it, that if we do behave properly, meaning, which is to say, according to Dharma, according to kindness, according to make decisions that allow us to sleep at night, that is the kind of strength we are courting. That's the kind of strength we want. That's the kind of strength we admire, and we certainly see in the saints. There was a time when members of Master's organization, Self-Realization Fellowship, during his lifetime, went to a public talk given by, I can't remember the man's name now, but he was someone who had been with Master in the early years and then began teaching on his own, and took Master's teachings and were passing them off as his own teachings. And so this man in this public lecture said, is there anyone here from Self-Realization Fellowship? Please stand up. And so a number of these people all stood up, and perhaps expecting to hear praise of Yoganandaji, who this man had learned these things from. And instead, this man just launched into a tirade against them, against Yoganandaji, and so on. And they were furious. And so they came back and home, and they phoned Master, and they said, can you believe what has happened here? And Master said, I will speak to him. And so they felt very satisfied with that. And so Master called the man, and he said, thank you for all that you are doing to spread the message of God and the masters in this country. I bless you. All the masters bless you. That was it. And it's so thrilling because, of course, these students of Master wanted, him to correct this person. But Master had his reasons, his wisdom, and he knew the right course. And it's how we would all want to be. Someone else said to Swamiji, an older man who was prominent within the Indian community, the Indian spiritual community in California. He had his own spiritual group as well. He said, when I first came to this country, I heard many people speaking against Paramahansa Yogananda. And when I met him finally, he had nothing but good things to say about each of them. And the man said, I soon saw on whose foot the shoe fit. A decent person, sort of a kindly person, doesn't like to hear someone else being lambasted, criticized, trashed by someone else. It's just something just unclean about it, and it makes sort of the whole thing seem a bit suspicious. So, to come back, I was having these encounters of mine, and I was thinking, okay, here's my whole strategy of how I'm going to argue back. And the thought occurred to me that I was not going to win. I just sort of felt and realized, on the grounds of logic, I won't be able to win. On the grounds of reason, I won't be able to win. Because the person I was arguing with was brilliant. I mean, extremely brilliant in terms of logic and so on. And so I decided that I would not let those doubts and attacks, very personal and specific, not just abstractly about God, but about my spiritual path and so on, and that I would not let them enter my heart. I just said, I'm going to build a wall here, and I'm not going to let it touch my heart, no matter how confused my mind gets. I really believe in what I'm doing, and so I'm not going to, get shaken. And so I went back in and went down in flames. Just got, so twisted up and was asked questions I couldn't possibly answer. I just got, too confused. And one of the questions was, what can you say to me that will, how can you say, or can you say, that you will guarantee that in 5 years you will not regret the decisions you are making now? All I was deciding to do was meditate and pray and take the spiritual path seriously. I think, I was living at an Ananda community at that time. So that was a decision that was after some years. And meaning some years after reading Autobiography of a Yogi. So how can you guarantee that you won't have regrets? And don't say it's because you're intelligent, because that is not an answer. Okay. And I had to admit, honestly speaking, truthfully speaking, that I couldn't guarantee in 5 years anything. How can we say that we know for certain 5 years from now, and even 1 year from now, that this will be the case? We can't. If we're going to be honest about it, I was being honest, ... And so I didn't have an answer for that one. And so I didn't try to answer it. But when I went away later that night, of course, I was still quite disturbed. I did say I'm not going to lose my belief in what I'm doing, but at the same time, I don't have an answer, and that's disturbing. I just meditated on it. I prayed, and I tried to calm down. And what hit me was my answer was, I have faith. I don't know. I can't say for sure, but I have faith. Based on my experience, this is stronger than belief. Belief is sort of a hypothesis or an untested thought that gives us the motivation to try it. But when those things are tested, when our hypotheses are tested, when our experiments succeed, we start to build faith in that. I have seen it work. As Master says in Autobiography of a Yogi, when his brother Ananta challenged him, the chapter 2, Penniless Boys in Vrindavan, one of the most thrilling chapters in the book, where to go to Agra, to go to the Taj Mahal, to Vrindavan, from Agra, his brother was in Agra, to go to Vrindavan, to take no money, to tell no one of his predicament, to not miss his meals, and to be able to return home to Agra. That was the test of his faith in the cold light of day, you could say, in the outer world. And when he was challenged, Master said the memories of so many times that God had come to his aid, and he began listing them from previous episodes shared in the book. One in which someone had tried to tell him, if you join the spiritual path full time, as a monk, you will be a failure. And Master prayed in that moment for an answer from God. And a sadhu from nearby came walking over and said, in response to your prayer, the Heavenly Father bids me to tell you that your life is that of a monastic, of a monk, and so on. I mean, it was just instant, the answer to his prayer. So he was saying all of these memories of answered prayers and God's help returned to him flood-like. And he, when challenged, said to his brother, I accept. And so, anyway, it's a thrilling story. If you haven't read it or read it recently, you might like to. It's wonderful to rejuvenate our faith. So in that same way, not nearly as dramatic, but I was feeling that, I have seen these things work in my life, and I have been happier than I have ever been before in following them. And my heart feels a connection, a resonance again, that resonance meaning vibrating in the same, I guess like this, vibrating at the same rate in a sort of sympathetic rhythm with it, with this truth, with this path that at the very least I can say, I want to follow it and find out. And so I didn't bother saying any of this to this relative of mine, who incidentally never challenged me again. It was almost as if he had given it his all and then just said, fine, whatever, who cares? Most people will lose their interest in your life, partly because they didn't have any interest in it to begin with. So the thing to remember then is that, and which I felt, was that challenge helped me immeasurably. I was strengthened by this attack from this doubter. I wasn't strengthened at first. I felt defeated even. But ultimately, I was very much strengthened. And this is something Swamiji had said, that he said, I realized my spiritual gains have been much greater from those times in my life of trial, of disaster, of grief and so on, of tragedy, that as I have passed through those, I have had much greater spiritual gains than I have had from other times in my life. So I realized that that if I were to feel gratitude for my life, for my spiritual life, for God's presence, I should feel gratitude also for this test. And I should thank my relative, which in fact I do, because I gained much from that. And we still talk and, get along well enough and so on. I remember it surprised me because he always would act so indifferently to anyone's opinion. And yet when I became a vegetarian, for some reason I think he felt a little, I don't know how he felt, but we were having lunch together. And he was with other family members, and he said, "This guy, pointing at me, is offended because I've ordered meat." And I hadn't even noticed that he'd ordered meat. I have to admit that was not the first thing on my mind. I was wondering if there was going to be another attack over the lunch table, so I wasn't caring what he was eating. And even if I noticed it, my family was still eating meat. I didn't feel that if I became vegetarian, they all should. We weren't all living together at that point anyway either. So anyway, So he said he's offended that I've ordered meat. And I said, well, this other relative of mine who's on a raw food diet would be offended that the food I ordered is cooked. And so luckily we could laugh about it and have a moment of lightness in the whole thing. So the challenge then, and the greatest harm that comes from a doubter challenging, and why Jesus in the Bible says, cast not your pearls before swine, and why Krishna says these wonderful things, which I will read in a moment, is because it does harm to the doubter himself or herself. It is not good karma to attack someone's spiritual faith. And we have to keep that in mind too. In one case, there was a situation where Swamiji was approached by someone. There was a master living who claimed to be a reincarnation of Babaji, which is a little bit confusing since Babaji said he was going to keep his incarnation, at least until the end of this day of Brahma. And we can ask, well, when did the day of Brahma end, or when will it end? Listen, you'll know, because everything will be gone. So there will be no ambiguity. Or maybe we won't know because we'll all just be asleep, who knows. But anyway, not yet. And so basically, you could say a student of this other Babaji came to Swami Kriyanandaji and said that this is Babaji, and you have to believe that, follow that, and have us come to Ananda and speak to everybody about it. And Swamiji said to a group of friends later, I'm perfectly convinced that this person isn't Babaji, just partly because of logic, but for other reasons too that I don't want to go into. But one of them was he said, if he really is Babaji, why hasn't he come and looked in on his work? Because he started this work by, commissioning Master. In fact, it was not too long ago, July 25th, where Babaji met Master and said, I'm sending you to the West, I sent you to Sri Yukteswar for training, and so on. So, but Swamiji didn't want to say that he didn't believe this was Babaji. He said, I feel it, to the man who was challenging Swamiji. He said, I feel it's a sin to undermine someone's faith in their path and to try to tear down, even if it's a wrong belief. If you tear down someone's wrong belief, they may end up losing faith in themselves. And that's much more damaging than following a wrong belief for a time and then discovering on their own that maybe there's something better. How many wrong beliefs do we have still? But we find over time and experiment and experience, I misunderstood that. But better that than someone to just say you're a fool and what you follow is false. And so this man challenged Swamiji even further. I'm leaping back and forth in the story, but the man had further said to Swamiji, you need to believe this is Babaji. And Swamiji said, well, if it really is Babaji, he's going to have to tell me himself. And the man said, he is telling you through me. And Swamiji said, well, he's going to have to find another way. And he said, and I have no doubt, being an avatar, he'll be able to do so. And he said, I'm not sure if the man was upset with me. He probably is. I hope he's not. But Swamiji had to say something. But even then, he didn't try to pick apart this man's belief. Again, it's just not right to. And if we're ever not sure, just think about how it has felt if anyone's tried to do that to us. Again, it's not a fair thing. It may happen to us. That is for our good. We may be tempted to do that in return. We shouldn't, and that is for our good. So, just to conclude, it is the doubter's own sort of safety, spiritual safety, that becomes in jeopardy when tearing something down. And so, for that reason too, we should be careful when Krishna says, for example, Never speak of these truths to one who is without self-control or devotion. So again, don't share these truths with one who is without self-control or devotion. Well, why? We can read this thing and say, here are people without self-control, without devotion, they render no service. They are not worthy of these truths. They are not good people. They're not good enough, like we are who can read of these truths. That is not the teaching. You see, that would be something the ego would delight in, but this is not for the ego. It is to say, rather, if someone is without self-control or devotion, then that is their next step. Before hearing more, doing more, their next step would be to gain some self-control. Well, how do you learn to have self-control? You learn really quickly the need for it by not having it. If we don't have self-control and we say something out of frustration and cause a lot more damage, and it doesn't end the argument with our witty statement, it adds gasoline to the fire. Or if we, do other things where we don't control our desires, we learn that we suffer from it, whether it's overeating or whatever it is, that there's pain that comes from it. So in time we learn, to avoid that pain, I will restrain this desire, this urge, this impulse, because it's not worth it to me to make such a mess of my life. And without devotion, how do we learn devotion? Well, it's very simple. Our hearts break. And when they break open, rather than break down, or if they try to close harder and tougher against the pain, that never works. But when they break open and we just say, isn't there some love that I can find in this world? And the answer is no. But you can find love in God, and that's beyond this world. It's not beyond our reality. It is our reality. That's why we seek it. That's why we yearn for it. When we get a taste of that, then devotion comes immediately. It's easy to feel devotion and gratitude to something which brings us joy. Who renders no service? That again would be the doubter's next step. Rather than me telling you about all these things, just do them. And we all find that as we give, it gives us relief. It relaxes the grip the ego has on us when we give to someone else. We think of them instead of ourselves. We give to them, and as being in being a channel for that healing or that, again, service, we feel such a joy. Swamiji discovered the joy of service, he said, when he came to Master, and he would chant, "O God beautiful," that chant of Guru Nanak, and he would sing over and over again, "To the serviceful, thou art service," because it was such a joy and its own reward to be of service to others. And Krishna says, do not share these truths with one who does not care to hear. And that is the most practical teaching of all of these, because you can't necessarily make someone serve. They're going to have to come to it on their own. But if they do not care to hear, if they have said Ada Vendam not after you've spoken, but before, then it means it's just not worth it. Because when we tell somebody or force something down someone's throat when they are not ready for it and do not want it, we do harm to them. And that's not good for us to have harmed someone. Because we've prejudiced them. They said they didn't want it. We've told them anyway, say about meditation. And then later in life, when they might be open to it, because they've had enough hard knocks, say, that they say, maybe I would want to meditate. And someone says, well, why don't you learn meditation? Ugh! They already have that prejudice. They remember when the last time somebody brought that up, it left a sour taste in my mouth, and I remember the sour taste. So, you see, it's much better to wait and ask yourself, really. We have to always ask ourselves, am I speaking from my need to say it, or the other person's need to hear it? And if it is coming from my need to say it, we then just ask ourselves, not, oh, well, too bad, bottle it up, swallow it, don't say it, but what do I hope to accomplish by saying it to the person if they're not wanting to hear it? Well, it will be relief, or it will be, I will have said the truth. Well, then let us say the truth just with that person not in the room. Say it to the wall. Say it to God. Write it furiously in our journal so that the truth is out there. It's important to say the truth and to acknowledge it. But the truth does not depend on someone else acknowledging it. It's just true. And so if we can get calm, get centered in ourselves, who knows, then we may find something that person is ready to hear and that would be helpful to them. And lastly, Krishna says, never speak of these truths to one who speaks ill of me. Again, just because there's no point. And we will often find that such people who are opposed to the spiritual path over time, seeing your example, not of the shining, radiant glow from your face, because they may not be able to see that, but seeing how you handle life, then they may be, it has happened so often that people have said to a devotee on the path, I don't know how you handled that disaster in your life. I wouldn't have been able to handle it. I don't know how you're, helping me or so patient with me after all the things I said to you, or I am proud of you for what you've been able to do. Just keep doing whatever spiritual thing you're doing, because it's obviously working over time. Especially if there's friendship or love, they'll see that, your friends and so on. But the point is, we have to follow the truth for the truth's sake, and because it is our own destiny, our own nature, and for no other reason. God bless you.